Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the White Belt MMA podcast. And it's an absolute pleasure to have on the show one of the top MMA journalists in the game today, Mike Bohn from MMA Junkie. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm great, brother. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, obviously, when I sent you the message, I honestly didn't expect you to respond. I just chopped my shot and I was like, hey, if it happens, it happens. And then you eventually ended up responding to my message, which was so cool because, I look up to your work. I mean, you're one of the role models, like in the field. So, I look up to you, look up to Era Hawani, and then like your interviews, like it's interview after interview, and I give you so much props. But, I really want to, talk about your journey, talk about how you got into journalism, what drove that entrance, and if you can, tell us a little bit about the start.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate all the kind words and everything. I'm happy to be here and appreciate you reaching out and even, wanting to talk to me and everything. But to answer your question, I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but I guess the short version, I mean, I was always just, I think like a lot of people who are in this industry, just a big fan of the sport and everything like that. And when I went to my first live UFC event, that kind of just took my fandom to like the next level. I was like, I really want to be involved with this and everything. And I always kind of had a passion for writing throughout high school and stuff like that, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do in university. So I just started like a little, through being a fan of the sport, just a little blog with a couple of my friends where we just like made our predictions for the fights and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed it. I liked the aspect of kind of like editing what they would submit and putting the posts together and kind of creating a website looking story. And from there, as I was going to university, I started taking some journalism classes and some writing classes and was continuing to build this little website I had at the time, and would just do, add more things. I had a friend who, did website design. He made me a little more of a good looking site and stuff like that. And from that point on, it was just kind of reaching out to people and trying to get interviews. At the time, Twitter, I would use Facebook, things like that, and just message as many people as I could, really trying to get interviews. And from there, I managed to get some notable people and would just kind of build it up a little bit more and more. And then eventually, I was living in New York at the time doing an internship at a radio station, and I'd met Luke Thomas when I was out there. And I'm sure everyone watching this knows who Luke Thomas is. And we became friendly. Saw him at like a amateur wrestling event, and he was working for SB Nation at the time, which owns Bloody Elbow and MMA Fighting and MMA Mania. And he had connected me with one of the editors at MMA Mania, and they had looked at my website and said, maybe I think you're a good fit here. So I went and started working there for a little while, producing a lot of content, continuing to do similar things that I did at my own site, but just with a slightly bigger platform. And then through working there for about a year or so, MMA Junkie had an opening, and they had reached out to see if I was interested, and kind of the rest is history from there. It's been about 8 years with MMA Junkie since then.
That's awesome. And I really want to, add on to what you said right there about you creating your own website, because I can kind of relate that to what I'm trying to do with White Belt MMA, and reaching out to fighters and media personalities that are involved in the sport. So for you, when you started reaching out to all these fighters and media personalities, how long did it take for you to get your first one? Because for me, I'll admit it took a couple of months, because I mean, I don't blame them. I mean, they're getting a message from an account that barely has any followers, and they're like, oh, let me take a chance on the kid. But for you, how long did it take?
Yeah, it definitely did take some time. I mean, I think I was fortunate. This is in 2013 or so, where I don't think social media was where it is now today, where there's a lot more exposure, a lot more people probably messaging for that stuff. So I think definitely I was a benefactor of the timing and it just being kind of an earlier stage. But yeah, it did take a while for people to get back. I reached out to managers, to fighters. Sometimes just at the start, it was like email interviews, which obviously, doesn't serve kind of the purpose that we have today, where video and audio is a lot more of a impactful kind of measure and getting out to an audience and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a lot of messages, man. I mean, I'd probably message 10 or so people a day and would be lucky to get one back, even if it was saying no. So things like that. I know it takes a long time, and always don't get the responses. But I think one of the first people who did give me an interview was John Anik, who, of course, as we know, the voice of the UFC today. And this is before he had ever actually worked a UFC card live. At the time, had just been hired and was doing like test runs, cage side, where he would call the fights, but for more or less just training purposes, no one would be hearing that. And he did an interview with me at the time, and that was obviously kind of a big get. And I think in terms of the big fighter, Benson Henderson was one of the people who did a phoner with me, I believe, going into his second fight with Frankie Edgar, and they rematched for the lightweight title. So yeah, and it was just like a short 5 minute or so conversation, but definitely can take time and can be, irritating to not always get the responses and things like that. But you cast a wide net and then hopefully get a couple fish back.
Definitely. And then like, when you started this blog, so I know you said you started with like a bunch of your friends and everything like that. So
Mhm.
like you guys being such big fans of the sport, and then, like you said, you got John Anik, you got Benson Henderson, and then obviously like as the time went on, you started getting more and more names. What were your friends saying to you? Like where they were like, oh my God, like I can't believe this is happening. Like, we were just watching their fight like last weekend or them on TV. So like, what was their reaction to you getting all these interviews?
Yeah, they're obviously happy for me and everything. I think they live vicariously their UFC fandom through me a lot. The stories that I write, the people that I get to talk to, are obviously a great friend group. I'm still very close with those guys even to this day. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would say they're happy for me and they're proud of me, and it kind of just makes their enjoyment of the sport even more significant, seeing how close to it I am.
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, like you eventually, ended up did getting to sign on to MMA Junkie to work their events and everything like that. So like, from going from like your blog site, your website, you're making your interviews to like covering a live a UFC event live. Like, please tell us like how was that? Like how does the process go through just getting credentialed through by the UFC, and then from there, like, what's like a usual like, fight week for you? Because obviously for the fighters we have embeddeds and all that, but like we want to know about the journalistic side, like what goes into you know releasing the content for fight week for us fans to watch because of you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first fight week I ever did was UFC 149, which was in Calgary, and this was before I was working for MMA Junkie. I had actually just wanted to get my foot in the door, trying to get to any UFC event. So I'd reached out to some local radio stations in Calgary to see if they were interested in getting audio content, any interviews I could get from on site, or any press conference audio from like Dana White or anything like that. So that was kind of one of the things. And I think the UFC at the time with their PR team and the way they were credentialing, I think now they're definitely more website friendly in terms of like credentialing outlets like that that are primarily online. But at the time, it was such an earlier stage in the UFC. They're trying to get that quote unquote mainstream exposure, more or less. So they were way more interested in credentialing, newspapers and radio stations. And then, of course, they would credential the big MMA outlets at the time as well. But yeah, I mean, in terms of just the on site and trying to get the content out, I mean, it's almost just kind of a race in terms of all the outlets. And you go there and we're all filming the same stuff and trying to just get the face off up first, or the media days. And it's changed obviously a lot during the COVID period. Pre-COVID, we used to have like the big ultimate media days where everyone's sitting there in one room and you can go up and it's kind of a line to get your one-on-ones with the certain people. So it was a lot more of an opportunity to inject kind of the personal element of the coverage. But now I'm sure, as you guys see at these media days, it's basically just the fighter coming in one after another up to the dais where all the media is assembled, and it's just kind of everyone asking it more or less scrum style, but from their own seats, not kind of just standing around the person holding a microphone like it used to be. So it's definitely changed a bit during the COVID period, like fight weeks in particular, because as much as ever, I mean, the UFC does a great job in putting on these events and everything and making the fighters to a degree accessible, but now it's just very formulaic in terms of what's coming. You're having your media day on Wednesday, your weigh-ins on Friday, your fight on Saturday, and I think obviously that's just a product of circumstances with COVID. The fact that they're even doing this is kind of a big testament to them. So yeah, I mean, the fight weeks have changed over the last year plus or so, but before that, I mean, there's definitely more opportunities to do, I'd say, unique content coverage from on site, because you could maybe set something up with a fighter and do a extended one-on-one or whatever the case may be.
And like, I feel like this might be like a broad question to ask, but like, do you feel like we'll ever get to that point ever again? Like you said, like before, like it'll be kind of like a, like a scrum just to line up to like to get like a more personal, like one-on-one interview with the fighter, or do you think like the UFC's gonna like, keep this like COVID like protocol in terms of like, when it comes to interviews and like having the fighters be accessible to the media? Do you think they're going to stick with that, or we're eventually gonna get to see what we saw before?
I think we'll eventually get back,
Mm.
especially the UFC being the company that they are, and having the people in power there that they want. They want things to be back as to normal as soon as possible. So I think eventually they will go back. As I'm sure the whole world wants to what everything out there was like pre-COVID in terms of take all that kind of stuff that we're talking about. So I do think they'll eventually get back there. How long it will be, I don't know. I mean, they're obviously going to take as many precautions as they need to, as long as it's relevant to do so. So it could maybe be a little bit longer, maybe even the entirety of the rest of this year. But I think in time, once COVID is kind of out the door as much as it possibly can be, I think we might see what we were seeing before. And I hope that's the case, because it's much more enjoyable and, as I said, not as formulaic as it is now.
Yeah, definitely. And this is like a random question, but like I feel like throughout this whole time, like, I can relate to you because like, like you said, like you started off as a fan. Like, have you ever like gotten into like training some jujitsu or something like that with your friends? Like obviously like, throughout your career. Cause I know, I mean, you're busy guys, so I'm assuming there isn't that much time, but when you do, like, do you have that time to go and train or?
Yeah, I mean, when I was living in New York, I actually kind of got my start in training by training at Henzo Gracie's gym, and I got a couple stripes on my white belt there in jiu-jitsu, which was obviously awesome. And this was very early on, like I said, when I was kind of in New York during that period, 2013 or so. It was crazy just being in that gym, like, because we had our practice for like the beginners slash white belts, I think at noon each day, and it just happened to be a few blocks down from the office I was working at. So I'd go there and do those rolls on my lunch break. And then right after at 1 p.m. was the pro practice. So you'd go in there and you would see GSP in there every couple of weeks. You'd see Frankie Edgar, obviously Henzo, all these kind of guys that are known for training out of there, Chris Weidman, et cetera, et cetera. So it was definitely pretty cool to be in that gym at the time and kind of get my start doing jiu-jitsu there. In more recent years, haven't done as much training, obviously in Toronto, where I lived the majority of the time. They've been completely shut down in terms of like having gyms open pretty much since the beginning of COVID. There hasn't even really been a reopening point. So I hope in time that everything will open up and there'll be opportunities to train and stuff like that, because I definitely think it's something enjoyable and definitely would like to get back to the jiu-jitsu more too.
Yeah, no, and have your friends indulged in it as well, or is it just you? You're the one that just became the lone wolf, and I was like, you know what? I'm already in the sport. Let's get in the sport even more.
No, I do have one of my good friends, John, actually trains kickboxing and has, sporadically throughout the years. He's actually just getting much more back into it now. So I do have some friends who are in it. Obviously, a lot of my good friends too that I've made over the past decade are within the industry as well. So I know a lot of people who definitely train these days and everything like that. But on the road in particular, like you would think maybe there would be more opportunities to get training in and stuff like that. But it's so busy when you're covering these events. There's not typically the time to get a roll in or something like that.
Yeah, no, completely understandable. Completely understandable. So, to bring it back to your journalism career, I feel like I want to ask everyone that like covers the sport this. It's like for you, like, when was the moment that you realized that like, oh my God, like this is probably my biggest interview to date, and like in a weird way, because I know how it is. Like you get an interview, a big interview, and you're like, oh great, like I'm psyched. But then like there's also the other half of you that says, okay, on to the next one. But if you kind of have to, sit back and kind of look at the journey, like what's been like your biggest interview that you got to the point that you're like, oh my God, like I made it.
Oh man, I don't know if I'd necessarily say anything made me think I made it or things like that. But in terms of the biggest interviews, I mean, the one that definitely comes to mind off the top of my head is when I went to Albuquerque and spent a day with John Jones a few years ago. I believe this was in 2017. It was right as he was preparing to come back from his suspension after the hit and run and everything that he had, and obviously had the title stripped, and just there was so much going on with him. He was away from the sport for a long time, and he was supposed to fight Daniel Cormier at, I think, UFC 182. and the rematch was obviously very anticipated and everything. Actually, I think it was UFC 187, and it was Jones's big comeback and just craziness. I did this whole project with him, spending a day watching him train, watching him do some of the last hours of his community service, stemming away from that car accident, and then did about a 2-3 hour sit down interview with him inside Jackson Wink. And it was great. A lot of stuff about the Daniel Cormier rivalry and just everything going on with that fight. And then about 2 weeks before the fight, Daniel Cormier gets injured. The fight gets called off. John Jones gets ticketed or pulled over again for the drag racing incident, and then just the whole story that I had basically done went to hell. So I didn't even get to really write it the way I had originally intended. Went to Albuquerque, but just that was definitely a cool moment, like going there and being able to spend time with John, everything like that, get to know him a little bit better, even though the whole thing didn't pan out exactly how it had been imagined. But that definitely stands out as a notable one in my mind.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the interviews that I look at, and and I'm just like, yeah, this is Mike's like one of his best interviews, because like you said, it's such like a long form interview as well, that it's like, like it's something that like us MMA fans and like everyone that like wants to be in your profession like strive to do. But like I do have to ask, like, especially like when like you're interviewing fighters, and then especially when it comes to like touchy subjects and all that, like how do you go about that? Because like obviously you don't want to be insensitive and ask like a really a dumb question that like it just ruins the relationship. So like for you as a journalist, like how do you go about that, and like going around like touchy subjects in interviews?
I think it just depends on the person, the circumstance. It's all kind of a case by case basis, and you just want to be respectful about it. I think that's kind of what it ultimately comes down to. There's the ways to handle things with each individual, as I kind of said, but I don't think there's necessarily like a blanket way to approach it, besides saying that you want to be ask your question, but try to do it in a fair and direct and responsible kind of way. I think there's ways to do that with pretty much every scenario, and if you don't get a adequate answer, follow-ups of course are important too. But I think it just really depends on the relationship that you have with the person and how you approach it. And I think there's almost anything that you can really ask.
Yeah, okay. No, but yeah, I just wanted to ask that. But like now to bring it back, to the current times, like obviously like you're covering every event, but then you also covered the Triller Fight Pass. I mean the Triller Fight Club, the Jake Paul and Ben Askren thing, and they even had you in a little preview right before the fight happened. So like, can you just tell us a little bit of experience of just covering that event? Because like obviously it just looked completely different compared to your typical combat sports event.
Yeah, so I still haven't seen that video package or the actual broadcast of the event because I was there live. So I don't know how it necessarily came across on television, but being there live, it was really cool. I mean, the extravagance of the production that they had with all the camera rigs and the lighting and everything, the multiple stages for the music acts, and then the boxing element, and then of course just the entire atmosphere with all the influencers and celebrities, and just being there with people in general. I mean, I know it wasn't like a sold out stadium or anything like that. They didn't even really have fans in there or anything, but just you could feel the vibe and the excitement from people being there and everything like that. So I thought it was a blast, honestly. I mean, as you said, and we talked about a little bit earlier, the UFC fight weeks can be very routine, and not saying that that's a bad thing or anything like that. I don't take any of them for granted. I enjoy being there anytime I get the opportunity to go. But they are, very, as I said, formulaic. It's kind of the same thing, just different characters involved at each fight. So to be at something like this, it was just totally unique and different. I haven't covered, a ton of boxing exclusive shows, if you can even call this a boxing show. I mean, it was just a crazy circus, and it was a fun circus. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was, as I said, something totally different. And I think, that's kind of what you do this for, right? You want different experiences and trying to, kind of cover different elements of the sport or the entertainment or whatever. So being there live and just seeing the whole thing unfold, everything that went on behind the scenes, all just the big names and acts and everything they had there, I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, whatever people's feelings on Jake Paul are aside, I think, you can't deny that felt like a event of some kind, whether it was something you thought was appealing or not. It was just like, what am I watching? This is kind of like crazy and different and unique.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I feel like if anything, bro, people would have to give Jake Paul his props. I mean, the guy can fight. Obviously, he's not gonna go to the level and fight Canelo or anything like that. But like, I feel like at this point, it's like, hey, I mean, the kid's smart. He's marketing himself well, and he can fight. And I feel like most of the people calling him out probably don't even train themselves. But that's all it is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Jake Paul is like you said, no one's thinking he's going to beat Canelo, but he's a 24-year-old kid. He has all the resources in the world. He can go have the connections to train with good people. If someone like that, he's obviously, semi-athletic. He like played sports in high school and everything like that. So someone like that, if they have the dedication and are willing to commit the time and resources, like, ideally you should be able to become fairly good at anything if you put that hard work and focus, work with the right people and are doing it the right way. So yeah, I mean, is he going to become world champion or anything like that? I wouldn't put my money on it, but is he good enough to beat some other trained fighters, whether you want to call Ben Askren a pro boxer or not? He obviously is a trained fighter and was for many years. So obviously it takes some degree of skill to be able to beat someone.
Yeah, and then I mean, he's got a set of cojones, especially too after what happened with the Floyd Mayweather stuff and all that, the gotcha hat incident and everything like that. Because I don't know that many people that would go up to Floyd Mayweather and try to create that stunt. So props to him on marketing himself well. So
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to deny, even if you just want to come in and say how much you hate Jake Paul and dislike the video. He's done a great job of getting traction for himself. He's everywhere. He's playing, in my opinion, his cards right every single time and getting people to react to him and getting under certain people's skin and things like that. So whether you like it or not, how long will this last? But as of right now, I can see from the website metrics and the video views and anything related to Jake Paul, even if they're just hate watching it, they're still watching it. And it's kind of hard to deny that there is an interest there. And he's made an impression in the fight world right now.
yeah, definitely, definitely. So to bring it back to MMA now, UFC 262, big card this week, and Michael Chandler versus Charles Oliveira. So like
Yeah.
for you, like what's your week looking like for this week? Because I mean, it's the first fight post Habib, and in terms for the vacant lightweight title. So what's the process for you this week in terms of covering and creating content for the event this week?
Yeah, so we have John Morgan and Ken Hathaway heading to Houston for that event. So I'll be covering it from home this week. But as I said, kind of a normal fight week layout. There's the media day on Wednesday where we'll have, videos, stories, and all that stuff from all the people who attend. I think there's 12 fighters. There was originally going to be 14, but Jack Hermanson and Edmund Shabazian is being postponed from the card. And then Thursday, there's the press conference, which those do feel slightly unique coming back because we haven't seen too many in-person press conferences during the COVID time. There was a couple, but it's kind of nice seeing the fighters get up there and be able to face off earlier in the week, not just after weigh-ins, and then be able to say if they have anything to say to each other there at that point. So that'll obviously be Chandler, Oliveira, Tony Ferguson, and Beneil Dariush. Friday, there's the morning weigh-ins, official weigh-ins, I think, which are 9 p.m. Eastern or something like that. And then there's ceremonial weigh-ins Friday night, which is, again, something that they're not typically doing too much, but are coming back to the big pay-per-views. And then Saturday is the fight night. So, yeah, I mean, for me, working at home, it's, helping out the guys any way I can, whether it's, social media content or writing up stories and things like that. So really it's kind of a group effort there. Certain people are on site and they get assists from the people at home, and then kind of whatever else comes up along during fight week, whether there's breaking news or fingers crossed no more fight cancellations or things like that. So you just kind of try to keep up with the happenings that are going on in real time.
Yeah, definitely. And then like for you, like I'm not sure if you can make any predictions on the fight, but talk a little bit about the fight though. Like, how do you think the Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira fight's gonna go down, and on top of the Tony Ferguson and Beneil Dariush fight?
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky one, man. I was down at Sanford MMA in Deerfield Beach, Florida, a couple weeks ago, the week before UFC 261. Michael Chandler was about 4 weeks out from the fight, and he was looking in unbelievable shape. I mean, just watching that guy train, and never stops, man. He is an absolute beast in the gym, just training longer, earlier than everyone else who's there. It's pretty wild to see. So he's going to be coming in unreal shape for this fight. But Charles Oliveira is a dangerous man. Like, this guy has turned such a corner in the past couple of years. Really unbelievable striking now. We know what his jiu-jitsu is all about. So this is going to be a very dangerous fight for Michael Chandler. Of course, he's the smaller guy. In terms of frame wise, Oliveira's got that length, but that worked out to Chandler's advantage against Dan Hooker. Obviously not the exact same body types, but similar. So I don't know. It's going to be a tricky fight for both guys, but I'm picking Oliveira to win. I just think he's on such a roll right now and like so diverse and everything. But do I think Michael Chandler could go in there and land, another bomb of a punch early in the fight and knock Charles Oliveira out? I definitely think that's possible. But man, in my mind, it's like close to a coin toss. So I think, absent Dustin Poirier deciding to choose Conor McGregor over this fight, otherwise he'd be in there, I think this was the right lightweight title fight to make.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I can't wait for it. I mean, I feel like every time I watch like more and more content the UFC produces, like those countdown shows are starting to look more and more like movies now. It's like at this point, it's like I feel like I should pay my like $5 just to even watch them because like I feel like it's like I'm like it feels like such a treat just watching this for free. So that's crazy.
Yeah, no, UFC does a great job producing, all the stuff they do. They have some really talented people over there.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So yeah, Mike, I don't want to take more of your time because I know you're a busy guy. So, last question. So, throughout the interview, like I said, it's like it just made me more respect you even more and more because like I said, you're one of my role models in the field. So like, if for you, like if you were to give an advice, to someone like me or people that are trying to get in the position that you are today, like, what type of advice would you give them and on their journeys?
Yeah, just know it's a grind. I mean, it's not easy to kind of get one of the, um, you know, tougher to get spots at some of these bigger websites. I mean, the thing about this industry is there's not a ton of turnover in terms of, staffing. You see people like, John Morgan has been with our site for like 13, 14 years, something like that. I've been there 8 years. So I think the positions can be challenging to get, but that does definitely not mean that they're not possible to get. I have multiple people, Farah Hanoun, Nolan King, who work with me now, who had messaged me a few years ago asking, similar questions to what you're asking now. So there's definitely plenty of opportunity, but know that it's definitely a grind. I think there's these days a lot of people producing similar types of content coming into the space. And for me, one of the pieces of advice that actually Luke Thomas had given me years ago, when I was kind of asking him these things that you're asking me now, was kind of looking around at the industry and see what other people aren't doing and try to find a way to make yourself unique. And I know that may be kind of pointing out the obvious to a degree, but for me, at the time, not many people were doing stuff on facts and statistics and things like that early on, and that was something I kind of got my hand on and made something that was kind of part of my identity with my aspect of covering the sport. So things like that, I think there's still a lot of opportunity to be dynamic and unique with content. And I just think that's kind of the biggest piece of advice in getting yourself noticed. Because of course, anyone can write a predictions column or do a fight breakdown for UFC Fight Night 220 or whatever the card may be. But what do you make yourself kind of stand out from that group? Because I think once you kind of make that foothold, then that's when people start wanting to know your UFC Fight Night 220 breakdown and your prediction for things like that. So I think it just definitely takes patience, time, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity. The sport obviously isn't going anywhere; it's just getting bigger and better. You see what the UFC is doing in terms of just their product and all these other organizations that are blowing up and getting onto major platforms as well. So I don't think the opportunities in the space are going to shrink. I think they're only going to expand, and it's all about putting yourself in the right position to take advantage when one may come along your way.
Mike, thank you. Like I said, for me, like I'm gonna take that advice to heart. I'm sure everyone that's on this path with me as well, trying to make it, is going to take that advice as well. So, Mike, before we go though, do you want to plug in your social media so everyone watching this can go and follow you?
Yeah, sure. It's just Mike Bohn, MMA, MikeBohn, MMA on Twitter and Instagram. So you can follow me there.
Sounds good. So, Mike, once again, thank you. Hopefully, we can stay connected in the future, and I'll probably ask you some questions later on in terms of the journey. But, Mike, once again, thank you, and to everyone watching,